Samuel Turner's hands trembled as he gripped the wooden fence post outside the general store in Hachita, New Mexico, watching a group of ranch hands thunder past on their horses, dust billowing in their wake. The spring of 1882 had brought new life to the desert territory, but for Samuel, it brought only the familiar cold sweat of terror that seized him whenever hooves pounded the earth nearby. He had become a master of deception over his 24 years, perfecting the art of arriving everywhere on foot, claiming he preferred the exercise, or hiring wagons for longer journeys with carefully constructed excuses about needing to transport supplies. Nobody in this sun-scorched corner of New Mexico suspected that the tall, broad-shouldered man who wore his cowboy hat with such confidence and carried his revolver with easy familiarity was utterly, completely, bone-deep terrified of horses. The fear had started when he was 7 years old, back in Texas, when his father's stallion had reared up without warning and Samuel had watched helplessly as his older brother was thrown, his neck snapping on impact with a rock. The image had seared itself into his mind, the way the horse's eyes had rolled white with panic, the terrible sound of hooves crashing down, the stillness that followed. His parents had tried everything to get him back on a horse after that, but the moment his foot touched a stirrup, his body would lock up with such primal terror that he could barely breathe. By the time he was 16, Samuel had learned to hide it. He left Texas and drifted westward, taking jobs that kept him on the ground. He became skilled with a rope, excellent with a gun, and quick-witted enough to talk his way out of situations where riding might be expected. He worked as a guard at mining operations, a clerk in supply offices, a fence builder, anything that let him earn an honest living without revealing his shameful secret. Hachita was supposed to be a fresh start. The small settlement, situated in the southwestern corner of New Mexico Territory near the Mexican border, was growing steadily thanks to the nearby copper mines and the railroad that had arrived 2 years prior. Samuel had found work as an assistant to the town's blacksmith, a position that kept him stationary and useful. The blacksmith, an aging man named Horace, appreciated Samuel's strong arms and quick learning, and never questioned why his young assistant always walked the 3 miles from his boarding house to the shop each morning. The sun beat down mercilessly as Samuel finally released his grip on the fence post and headed toward the boarding house, where he rented a small room. The adobe buildings of Hachita shimmered in the afternoon heat, their thick walls promising relief from the temperature that regularly climbed past 90 degrees. He was halfway down the dusty main street when he heard a commotion from the livery stable. "You cannot be serious about this, Catherine," a man's voice, sharp with disbelief. "I am perfectly serious, Mr. Dalton. My father left me this ranch, and I intend to run it myself." The woman's voice was clear and firm, with an underlying warmth that caught Samuel's attention despite himself. "No woman can manage the Morrison spread alone. It is not proper, and it is certainly not practical. You should sell to me and return to Philadelphia where you belong." Samuel slowed his pace, curiosity overcoming his usual desire to avoid anything horse-related. Through the open doors of the livery, he could see a woman standing with her back straight, facing down a portly man in an expensive suit. She was perhaps 22 or 23, with auburn hair pinned up beneath a simple hat, and she wore a practical riding dress that was already dusty from travel. "Mr. Dalton, I have made my position clear. The Morrison Ranch is not for sale. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to arrange for my horse to be boarded while I am in town." The man Dalton sputtered, his face reddening. "You will fail within a month. That ranch needs experienced hands, and no ranch hand will take orders from a woman. Then I will find hands who are willing to work for someone who pays fairly and treats them with respect, regardless of whether that person wears trousers or a skirt. Catherine Morrison turned away from Dalton dismissively, leading a beautiful chestnut mare deeper into the stable. Samuel found himself lingering near the entrance, struck by the woman's composure. Dalton stormed past him, muttering under his breath about foolish women and wasted opportunities. Inside the stable, Catherine was speaking softly to her horse, her voice gentle now, all the steel gone from it. "I know, sweetheart. It has been a long journey. You will have good hay and fresh water, and tomorrow we will ride out to our new home." The livery owner, a grizzled man named Pete, emerged from the back. "I heard what Dalton said, miss. For what it is worth, your father was a good man. Knew horses better than anyone I ever met. If you are half the rancher he was, you will do just fine." "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. That means more than you know." Catherine handed him the reins, and Samuel watched as she gently stroked the mare's neck one final time before stepping back. "I will be staying at the boarding house for tonight. I plan to ride out to the ranch at dawn." "Alone, miss. That is a fair distance, and the trail can be rough." "I am quite capable of managing, but I appreciate your concern." As Catherine turned to leave, her eyes met Samuel's for the briefest moment. They were green, he noticed, the color of new grass after a rare desert rain. She gave him a small, polite nod, and he fumbled with his hat, pulling it from his head in a gesture of respect that came a beat too late. Then she was past him, walking with purpose toward the same boarding house where he lived. That evening, Samuel sat in the small dining room of the boarding house, picking at his meal of beans and cornbread. Catherine Morrison sat at a table across the room, studying a ledger book with intense concentration. The boarding house keeper, Mrs. Chen, a Chinese woman who had come to Hachita with the railroad workers and stayed to open her establishment, moved between the tables with quiet efficiency. "You are staring," Mrs. Chen said softly as she refilled Samuel's coffee. "Not polite." Samuel jerked his gaze away, embarrassed. "I was not. I mean, I was just—" "She is the Morrison girl. Father died 3 months ago, pneumonia. She came all the way from Philadelphia to claim her inheritance." Mrs. Chen's voice held approval. "Brave girl. Foolish, maybe, but brave. You think she can really run a ranch alone? Why not? Women are not so helpless as men like to think." Mrs. Chen's eyes sparkled with amusement. "Besides, she will need to hire help. Morrison Ranch has been sitting empty since Frank Morrison died. The foreman quit, and most of the hands drifted away. Too much work for one person, man or woman." Samuel nodded, trying to return his attention to his meal. But his eyes kept drifting back to Catherine, watching the way she frowned at the numbers in her ledger, the way she absently tucked a loose strand of auburn hair behind her ear. The next morning, Samuel woke before dawn as usual and dressed in the semi-darkness of his room. When he stepped out into the hallway, he nearly collided with Catherine, who was carrying a small travel bag. "Oh, I apologize," she said, stepping back quickly. "No, it was my fault. I should have been watching where I was going." Samuel pressed himself against the wall to let her pass, very aware of the narrow hallway. "You are Mr. Turner, are you not? Horace's assistant at the blacksmith shop." He was surprised she knew his name. "Yes, madam, Samuel Turner, Catherine Morrison. Though I suppose you heard that yesterday." A slight smile touched her lips. "Small towns have very efficient information networks." "That they do." Samuel hesitated, then asked, "You are heading out to your ranch this morning?" "Yes. I want to assess the property in full daylight, see what repairs are needed, what supplies I will need to order." She shifted her bag to her other hand. "I am told it is about an hour's ride north of town." I hope you do not mind me saying, but it seems like a big undertaking for one person. Catherine's expression became guarded. I am stronger than I look, Mr. Turner. I did not mean. I just meant that it is a lot of work managing a ranch, even with help. Well, I will simply have to rise to the challenge, will I not? She moved past him toward the stairs, then paused. Good day, Mr. Turner. Good day, Miss Morrison. Samuel watched her descend the stairs, feeling like he had somehow offended her without meaning to. He shook his head and made his way down to the street, beginning his long walk to the blacksmith shop on the eastern edge of town. The work that day was hot and monotonous, mostly repairing tools for the miners and shoeing horses. Samuel had learned to handle the shoeing by keeping the horses tied in a specific way and approaching from angles that gave him maximum control. Horace never noticed how Samuel's jaw clenched during these tasks, or how he always positioned himself near an exit. Heard the Morrison girl is back in town, Horace commented as they worked. Shame about Frank. He was a good customer, knew his horses, knew his land. She seems determined to run the place herself, Samuel said, hammering out a bent horseshoe. Determined is not the same as capable. Ranch work is not for the delicate. Horace spat tobacco juice into the dirt. Give her a month before she sells to Dalton or one of the other land grabbers. Samuel found himself bristling at the dismissal. Maybe she will surprise everyone. Maybe, but I would not bet money on it. 3 days passed. Samuel fell into his usual routine, walking to work before dawn, spending his days at the forge, walking home after sunset. He saw Catherine twice more, both times from a distance as she conducted business in town. She had hired 2 Mexican ranch hands, brothers named Miguel and Carlos, and had purchased supplies from the general store that were loaded into a wagon. She moved with efficient purpose, clearly working from a carefully planned list. On the 4th day, Samuel was closing up the blacksmith shop when Catherine appeared, leading her chestnut mare. The horse was favoring its left foreleg, and Catherine's face was etched with concern. Mr. Turner, is Horace still here? My horse has gone lame and I need someone to examine her. He left about an hour ago, visits his sister on Thursday evenings. Samuel approached cautiously, eyeing the mare with his practiced wariness disguised as professional assessment. What happened? I do not know. She was fine this morning when we rode back from the ranch, but when I went to the stable this evening to check on her, she was limping. Catherine stroked the mare's neck soothingly. Her name is Rosie. She was my father's horse, actually. He sent her to me in Philadelphia 2 years ago, said every Morrison should have a good horse. Samuel could hear the emotion in her voice, the connection between the horse and her late father. He swallowed his fear and moved closer, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. Let me take a look. He ran his hand down the mare's leg, feeling for heat or swelling. Rosie shifted nervously, and Samuel's heart began to pound, but he forced himself to continue. Catherine held the reins steady, murmuring soft reassurances to the animal. There is some swelling here, just above the hoof. Samuel straightened. Could be a stone bruise, or she might have strained something. She will need rest and cold compresses on the leg. No riding for at least a week. Catherine's face fell. A week? But I need to get back to the ranch tomorrow. Miguel and Carlos are waiting for me, and there is so much work to be done. I understand, but if you ride her injured, you could lame her permanently. Could you rent a horse from Pete at the livery? His horses are all spoken for. Apparently there is some kind of cattle drive passing through, and they have rented every available mount. Catherine bit her lip, thinking, what about a wagon? Could I hire someone to drive me out in a wagon? The freight drivers are all on runs to the mines or the railroad. This is their busy season. Samuel hesitated, then heard himself say, I could walk out with you if you are willing to wait until Sunday. That is my day off. Catherine looked at him with surprise. "Walk, Mr. Turner, it is a considerable distance." "I am used to walking. I walk everywhere." "That is very kind of you to offer, but it would take hours. I could not impose on your free day like that." Samuel shrugged, trying to appear casual despite the rapid beating of his heart at his own boldness. "I have nothing else planned. And honestly, I have been curious to see the Morrison spread. Your father had a good reputation." She studied him for a long moment, those green eyes searching his face. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" "Maybe I do not think you should have to face everything alone just because you are new in town." The words came out more honestly than he had intended. A genuine smile crossed Catherine's face, transforming her features. "Then I accept, Mr. Turner. Thank you. Shall we meet at the boarding house at dawn on Sunday?" Dawn it is. That night, Samuel lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering what he had gotten himself into. Walking to the Morrison ranch was one thing, but Catherine would eventually expect him to ride, would eventually notice that something was wrong with a man who lived in the West and avoided horses at all costs. The smart thing would be to make an excuse Sunday morning, to back out before he exposed his shameful weakness. But when Sunday morning arrived, he found himself waiting outside the boarding house as the sky lightened from black to deep blue. Catherine emerged a few minutes later, wearing a practical split skirt and carrying a canteen and a small pack. "Good morning," she said, her voice cheerful despite the early hour. "I brought water and some food for the journey. Mrs. Chen gave me some of her excellent buns." "That was thoughtful of you." Samuel took the pack she offered, slinging it over his shoulder alongside his own canteen. They set out northward on the main road, which quickly narrowed to a well-worn trail once they left the town behind. The desert landscape spread around them in shades of tan and brown, dotted with creosote bushes and occasional stands of mesquite. The air was cool now but would be punishing by midday. "So, Mr. Turner, why does a young man in New Mexico territory prefer walking to riding?" Catherine asked after they had been traveling for about 20 minutes. Samuel had prepared several answers to this inevitable question. "Cheaper than keeping a horse, and I like the exercise. Most men would rather spend money on a horse than walk everywhere. It is rather unusual." "I suppose I am unusual then." "I meant no offense. Unusual can be interesting." She glanced at him sideways. "Where are you from originally?" "Your accent is not local." "Texas, near Austin, came west about 8 years ago. Family still there?" Samuel's jaw tightened. "My parents died some years back, fever. I had a brother, but he passed when we were young." "I am sorry." Catherine's voice was soft with sympathy. "I lost my mother when I was 14. It was just my father and me after that. He moved out here for his health, thought the dry air would be better for his lungs. I stayed in Philadelphia with my aunt to finish school, but we wrote to each other every week." "He must have missed you." "I missed him too. I should have come sooner, should have visited more, but I kept thinking there would be time and then." She trailed off, her voice thick with emotion. They walked in silence for a while, the only sounds the crunch of their boots on the hard, packed earth and the occasional cry of a hawk overhead. Samuel found himself very aware of Catherine's presence beside him, the way she matched his pace easily despite being nearly a head shorter. "Why did you really offer to help me?" she asked suddenly. "People in town seem to think I am foolish for trying to run the ranch. I am sure you have heard the talk." Samuel considered his answer carefully. "I think you should have the chance to try. Maybe you will fail, maybe you will succeed. But you should get to find out for yourself, not have everyone decide for you before you even start." "That is unexpectedly kind." "Why unexpectedly? Most men I have encountered seem to believe women should be protected from our own ambitions. It is tiresome." Samuel laughed. "I imagine it is. The sun climbed higher as they continued north, the heat building steadily. They stopped once to drink water and eat some of Mrs. Chen's buns, resting in the meager shade of a rocky outcropping. Catherine asked him about his work at the blacksmith shop, and Samuel found himself talking more freely than he usually did, describing the various projects and the satisfaction of shaping metal with his own hands. "You enjoy the work," Catherine observed. "I can hear it in your voice." "I do. There is something honest about it. You start with raw materials, you apply skill and effort, and you create something useful. The results are immediate and visible. I hope to feel that way about the ranch. My father's letters were full of descriptions of the land, the cattle, the horses. He loved it here." She stared out at the desert landscape, her expression wistful. "I want to understand what he saw in this place, why he chose to build a life here." It was late morning when they finally crested a rise and Catherine pointed ahead. "There, that is Morrison land." The ranch spread out before them in a valley between low hills. A creek cut through the property, marked by a line of cottonwood trees that stood out green against the brown earth. The ranch house itself was a sturdy adobe structure with a wide porch, surrounded by several outbuildings including a barn, a bunkhouse, and a series of corrals. Even from a distance, Samuel could see the signs of neglect: a sagging fence here, loose shingles there, weeds growing unchecked around the buildings. "It needs work," Catherine said, her voice determined rather than discouraged. "But the bones are good. My father built this place to last." They made their way down to the ranch, where Miguel and Carlos emerged from the barn to greet them. The two brothers were in their 30s, weathered by years of ranch work, and they treated Catherine with respectful courtesy. "Miss Morrison, we have made progress on the barn roof," Miguel reported in accented English, "and Carlos has been clearing the irrigation ditches." "Excellent. Thank you both." Catherine turned to Samuel. "Mr. Turner, this is Miguel and Carlos Reyes. They have been working here for 3 days now. Gentlemen, this is Samuel Turner from town. He was kind enough to walk out with me since my horse went lame." The brothers shook Samuel's hand, their grips firm and their eyes assessing. Samuel wondered what they saw when they looked at him, whether they noticed the way he positioned himself to keep the horses in the corral within his line of sight, the way his shoulders tensed at the sound of their movement. "Come, let me show you around," Catherine said, her enthusiasm evident. For the next 2 hours, Samuel toured the Morrison ranch. Catherine walked him through every building, pointing out repairs that were needed, explaining her plans for improving the property. She had vision and energy, he had to admit, and her ideas were practical rather than fanciful. She knew more about ranching than he had expected, clearly drawing on knowledge from her father's letters and her own research. "The main problem is that I need to rebuild the herd," she explained as they stood by the largest corral. "My father had about 200 head of cattle before he got sick. The foreman sold most of them off and pocketed the money before disappearing. I have enough funds to purchase new stock, but I will need to hire more hands to manage them. Miguel and Carlos are excellent workers, but 3 people cannot run a full operation." "What about horses?" Samuel asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "A ranch needs good horses. I have 6 in the barn. They were the ones the foreman could not steal easily. I will need more eventually, but they will do for now." Catherine leaned on the fence rail, staring out at the empty corral. "My father wrote that he had 24 horses at one point. He was trying to build a reputation for breeding good working animals." Samuel nodded, forcing himself not to react to the pride in her voice. "Sounds like he was a man with a plan." He was, and I intend to honor that plan by making this ranch successful. She turned to look at Samuel directly. "I know everyone thinks I will fail. Dalton has already been out here once this week, trying to pressure me to sell. But I will not give up on my father's dream, or on my own. There was steel in her voice, determination in the set of her jaw. Samuel found himself believing her, found himself wanting to help make her improbable dream succeed. They ate lunch on the porch of the ranch house. Simple fare of bread and cheese that Catherine had packed. Miguel and Carlos joined them, and the conversation flowed easily despite Samuel's limited Spanish and the brothers' careful English. They talked about the work that needed doing, the supplies that would be required, the timeline for various repairs. The fence along the eastern boundary is nearly gone, Carlos reported. It will need to be completely rebuilt. Add it to the list, Catherine said with a sigh. At this rate, I will be spending my entire inheritance on repairs before I even buy cattle. Good fences are important, Miguel said seriously. Your father always said a ranch is only as good as its fences. After lunch, Samuel offered to help with some of the repairs. He spent the afternoon working alongside Carlos to reinforce one of the corral fences, enjoying the physical labor and the satisfaction of visible progress. Catherine worked in the ranch house, cleaning and organizing, occasionally emerging to consult her list or ask the men questions. As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, Samuel reluctantly announced that he needed to start back to town. Catherine walked with him to the edge of the property. "Thank you for today," she said, "for walking all this way, for helping with the fence, for—" She paused, searching for words, "for treating my dream like it matters." "It does matter," Samuel said simply. "Good luck, Miss Morrison." "Catherine, please call me Catherine." "Then you should call me Samuel." She smiled at that, and Samuel felt something warm unfold in his chest. "Safe journey back, Samuel, and thank you again." The walk back to Hachita seemed longer, perhaps because he was tired from the day's work, or perhaps because he was alone with his thoughts. Samuel found himself thinking about Catherine more than was probably wise. She was determined and brave, facing down an entire town's skepticism to pursue something she believed in. It was admirable. It was also terrifying, because the more time he spent around her, the more likely it became that she would discover his secret. A woman running a horse ranch could not afford to be involved with a man who was afraid of horses. It was absurd, impossible, doomed from the start. Not that there was anything to be doomed, Samuel reminded himself firmly. He had helped her once, that was all. It did not mean anything, could not mean anything. But over the following weeks, Samuel found reasons to see Catherine with increasing frequency. She came to town every few days for supplies or to conduct business, and somehow Samuel always seemed to be nearby when she arrived. They would talk, sometimes just for a few minutes, sometimes for an hour if she had time. He learned that she loved reading, that her favorite author was Jane Austen, that she missed the ocean from her time in Philadelphia, but found the desert's stark beauty growing on her. She learned that he was teaching himself to read and write better in his spare time, that he sent money to a widow in Texas who had been kind to him when he first left home, that he had a talent for fixing broken things. "You should come out to the ranch again," Catherine said one afternoon in early June. They were standing outside the general store, and she was waiting for her purchases to be loaded. "Miguel has been asking after you, and there is always more work than hands to do it. I would not want to impose." "It is not an imposition if I am inviting you. Besides, I could use your advice on something." She lowered her voice. "I am thinking about trying to start my father's breeding program again, but I do not know enough about evaluating horses. You work with them at the blacksmith shop. You must know what makes a good horse." Samuel's mouth went dry. "I am not really an expert on horses, Catherine. You know more than I do. Please, Samuel, I trust your judgment." The word trust hit him like a physical blow. She trusted him, and he was deceiving her every day by hiding his fear. He should tell her the truth right now, should confess his weakness and accept her inevitable disappointment. But looking into her hopeful green eyes, he could not make the words come. "I will come next Sunday," he heard himself say. True to his word, Samuel made the long walk to the Morrison ranch the following Sunday. Catherine greeted him with obvious pleasure, and they spent the morning working on various repairs around the property. Samuel was becoming familiar with the layout of the ranch, with the rhythm of the work, with the easy camaraderie between Catherine and her two employees. After lunch, Catherine led him to the barn. "Come look at the horses. Tell me what you think." The barn was dim and cool inside, smelling of hay and leather and horse. 6 horses occupied the stalls, and they shifted and snorted as Samuel and Catherine entered. Samuel's heart began its familiar panicked rhythm, but he forced himself to breathe slowly, to keep his expression neutral. "This is Belle," Catherine said, stopping at the first stall. A gray mare regarded them with intelligent eyes. "She is the oldest, about 12 years. Gentle as a lamb, my father wrote." Samuel nodded, keeping several feet between himself and the stall door. "She looks sound." "And this is Thunder, a black gelding, powerfully built. My father's riding horse. He is spirited but responds well to a firm hand." They moved down the line, Catherine describing each horse with evident affection and knowledge gleaned from her father's letters and her own observations over the past month. Samuel offered what insights he could without revealing his ignorance or his terror, drawing on what he had observed at the blacksmith shop and what he had heard other men say. "The problem is that I need to be able to evaluate new horses when I start purchasing," Catherine said as they left the barn. "I need to understand conformation, temperament, training. I have been reading books, but they only teach you so much. You could hire someone to advise you. Someone with real expertise." "I could, but I would prefer to learn myself. A rancher should understand their stock." She looked at him hopefully. "Would you teach me? About horses, I mean. You could show me what to look for." "Catherine, I really do not think I am the right person." "Please, Samuel. I am asking for help, and I do not do that easily." Her voice was quiet but intense. "I need someone I can trust, and I trust you." There it was again, that word. Samuel felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to step off into empty air. He should refuse, should explain why he could not help her. Instead, he said, "I will do what I can." Her smile was radiant. "Thank you. Could we start next Sunday? I could use some lessons in riding too. I know the basics, but my father always said there is a difference between sitting on a horse and truly riding one." "Riding lessons?" Samuel's voice came out slightly strangled. "Yes. I need to be able to handle the horses confidently if I am going to run this ranch." "You could teach me, show me the proper techniques." She was looking at him with such faith, such certainty that he could help her. Samuel felt the trap closing around him, built from his own lies and omissions. Yes, next Sunday." That night, back in his small room at the boarding house, Samuel sat on his bed and put his head in his hands. He had backed himself into an impossible corner. Catherine expected him to teach her to ride, to demonstrate proper horsemanship, to be the expert she believed him to be. The truth would come out, and when it did, she would realize he had been deceiving her all along. He should go to her tomorrow, confess everything, end this before it went any further. But the thought of seeing disappointment in her eyes, of watching her warm regard turn to scorn or pity, was unbearable. The week passed in a haze of anxiety. Samuel worked at the blacksmith shop, went through his daily routines, and spent his evenings trying to devise a way out of the situation he had created. By Saturday night, He had decided to simply not show up at the ranch on Sunday. It was cowardly, but it was better than the humiliation of revealing his fear. But Sunday morning found him walking the familiar path north to Morrison Ranch anyway, his feet carrying him forward despite his better judgment. Catherine was waiting for him, dressed in riding clothes and practically vibrating with eagerness. "I am so glad you came. I was not sure you would." She led him toward the barn, talking quickly about her plans for the day. "I thought we could start with basic riding techniques. Miguel says I sit too stiffly in the saddle, but I am not sure how to fix it. And then maybe you could show me how to evaluate a horse's gaits. I have been reading about it, but seeing it in practice would help." Samuel followed her into the barn, his throat tight with dread. Catherine was already moving to one of the stalls, leading out a docile-looking bay mare. "This is Daisy. She is the gentlest of the bunch, perfect for lessons. Let me saddle her up." Samuel watched as Catherine efficiently saddled the horse, her movements practiced despite her admitted beginner status. The mare stood patiently, and Catherine talked to her soothingly throughout the process. When she was done, she led Daisy out into the corral and turned expectantly to Samuel. "So, what should I work on first?" Samuel stood at the corral fence, his hands gripping the top rail so hard his knuckles were white. The mare was perhaps 20 feet away, calm and untroubled. Catherine was looking at him with bright, trusting eyes. Miguel and Carlos had emerged from one of the outbuildings and were watching with interest. "Samuel, are you all right? You look pale." He opened his mouth, trying to force out words, any words. His vision seemed to narrow, the edges going dark. The mare shifted her weight and Samuel flinched violently. "Samuel," Catherine's voice was sharp with concern now. She dropped the reins and hurried over to him. "What is wrong? I cannot do this." The words came out in a hoarse whisper. "Cannot do what? Teach me to ride." "I know I am probably a terrible student, but—" "No, I cannot. I am not." Samuel dragged in a breath that felt like broken glass. "I do not know how to ride, Catherine. I have never been on a horse. I am terrified of them." The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine stared at him, confusion crossing her face. "But you are a cowboy. You work in a blacksmith shop. You shoe horses every day." "I am not a cowboy. I am a fraud who is good at hiding and making excuses. I have been lying to you, letting you think I knew about horses when really I am just a coward who cannot even stand near one without wanting to run." The words tumbled out now, bitter and self-condemning. "My brother died when I was 7, thrown from a horse. I saw it happen. And ever since then I cannot. I just cannot." He waited for her disgust, her anger at being deceived. Instead, Catherine was quiet for a long moment, then said softly, "Miguel, Carlos, could you give us some privacy, please?" The brothers nodded and disappeared back into the outbuilding. Catherine guided the mare back into the barn, then returned to where Samuel still stood frozen at the fence. "Why did you not tell me?" she asked, and there was no judgment in her voice, only gentle curiosity. "Because I was ashamed. Because everyone expects men out here to be comfortable around horses, and I am a failure at the most basic requirement of Western life. Because—" He stopped, unable to continue. "Because you thought I would think less of you. Would you not?" Catherine was quiet for a moment, considering. "What I think is that you were 7 years old when something terrible happened. What I think is that fear is not the same as cowardice. What I think is that you have been carrying this alone for 17 years, and that must have been exhausting." Samuel finally looked at her, shocked by the compassion in her face. "You are not disappointed that you hid it from me, a little, disappointed in who you are, not at all." She moved to stand beside him at the fence. "You walked hours to help me, have spent your Sundays working on my ranch, have been nothing but kind and supportive even when you must have been terrified every time I brought you near the barn. That is not cowardice, Samuel. That is courage. It does not feel like courage. The bravest things rarely do. Catherine was quiet for a moment, then said, "Would you want to learn? To ride, I mean, not for me, but for yourself." "I do not know if I can." "I did not ask if you could. I asked if you wanted to." Samuel thought about his brother, young and laughing, being thrown from that horse. He thought about 17 years of fear, of limitations, of organizing his entire life around avoiding the thing that terrified him. He thought about Catherine, who had crossed a continent to claim a ranch she had never seen, who refused to give up despite everyone expecting her to fail. "Yes," he said quietly, "I want to, but I do not know how to start." Catherine's smile was gentle. "Then we learn together. I am no expert either, remember. We can figure it out side by side. That is not what you signed up for, maybe not, but it is what I am choosing." She held out her hand. "Partners." Samuel looked at her outstretched hand, then at her face. She meant it, he realized. She was not repulsed by his weakness, was not laughing at his fear. She was offering to help, to stand beside him as he faced the thing that had controlled him for most of his life. He took her hand. Partners. They did not work with the horses that day. Instead, Catherine made them lunch and they sat on the porch, talking. Samuel found himself telling her things he had never told anyone about his brother, about the accident, about the years of shame and secrecy that followed. Catherine listened without interruption, her green eyes steady and sympathetic. "I think we should start slowly," she said when he finished. "Maybe just spending time around the horses at first, getting used to their presence. I have been around horses at the blacksmith shop for years." "Yes, but you have been enduring it, not engaging with it. There is a difference." She tilted her head thoughtfully. "What if we started with grooming? Just standing with a horse, touching it, caring for it. No riding, no pressure, just building familiarity. You make it sound simple." "It will not be simple, but maybe it does not have to be as hard as you have been making it." She stood up, brushing crumbs from her skirt. "Come on. Let us go look at them. Just look, nothing more." Samuel followed her to the barn reluctantly. Inside, the 6 horses shifted in their stalls. Catherine walked down the line, stopping at a stall that held a small brown mare with a white blaze on her face. "This is Penny. She is the smallest and the oldest, 14 years. My father wrote that she was the first horse he bought when he started the ranch." Catherine opened the stall door and stepped inside, running her hand along Penny's neck. The mare whuffled softly, leaning into the touch. "She is gentle and patient. I think she would be good to work with." Samuel stood in the doorway of the stall, his heart hammering. Penny regarded him with dark, liquid eyes, showing no sign of alarm or aggression. She was small for a horse, barely reaching Catherine's shoulder. "Just step inside," Catherine said softly. "Stand here with me. That is all." It took Samuel 3 tries to make himself cross the threshold of the stall. Each time his body rebelled, muscles locking up, breath catching in his throat. But Catherine waited patiently, not pushing, and finally he managed to stand beside her, pressing himself against the wall as far from Penny as the small space allowed. "Good," Catherine said, as if he had accomplished something monumental rather than simply standing in a horse stall. "How do you feel?" "Terrified. But you are doing it anyway. That is what matters." She kept her hand on Penny's neck, stroking slowly. "Just breathe. She is not going to hurt you. See how calm she is." They stood there for perhaps 5 minutes, Catherine talking softly about Penny, about her father's letters describing the mare, about nothing in particular. Gradually, Samuel felt his heartbeat slow slightly. Penny did not move except to occasionally shift her weight or flick her ears. She was nothing like the panicked, rearing stallion from his nightmares. "That is enough for today," Catherine finally said. "You did well. I did not do anything. You faced your fear. That is everything." They walked back to the ranch house together, and Samuel felt shaky but also strangely proud. It was such a small thing, standing in a stall with a horse, but for him it felt like scaling a mountain. "Will you come back next Sunday?" Catherine asked. "Yes, if you want me to. I do." She smiled at him, and Samuel felt that warm unfurling in his chest again, stronger this time. "We are partners now, remember? We help each other." The following week, Samuel found himself actually looking forward to Sunday for the first time in years. He showed up at the Morrison ranch with a small gift, a book on horse husbandry he had purchased from the general store. "I thought we could read it together," he explained, handing it to Catherine. "Learn the theory while we work on the practice." Her face lit up. "This is perfect." "Thank you, Samuel." They spent the morning working on ranch repairs as usual, but after lunch, they went to the barn. This time, Samuel made himself step into Penny's stall without hesitation, though his pulse still raced. Catherine showed him how to brush the mare, and with shaking hands, Samuel ran the brush along Penny's shoulder. The mare's coat was warm and surprisingly soft under his touch. She stood placidly, seeming to enjoy the attention. Samuel kept brushing, the repetitive motion gradually becoming soothing rather than terrifying. "You are doing great," Catherine said softly, standing nearby but giving him space. "See how she trusts you." Over the following weeks, a pattern developed. Samuel would arrive at the ranch each Sunday, and he and Catherine would spend part of the day working on repairs and ranch business, and part of it working with the horses. They started with grooming, then progressed to leading Penny around the corral. Samuel's fear was still present, a constant companion, but it was no longer paralyzing. Catherine proved to be a patient and intuitive teacher, somehow knowing when to push him forward and when to let him retreat. She never laughed at his fear, never showed impatience with his slow progress. Instead, she encouraged each small victory and helped him through each setback. They also spent hours talking, sharing stories about their lives, their dreams, their fears. Samuel learned that Catherine had been engaged once, to a banker in Philadelphia, but had broken it off when she realized he wanted a decorative wife rather than a partner. Catherine learned that Samuel had drifted through half a dozen states before settling in New Mexico, always searching for a place that felt like home. "I think I might have found it here," Samuel admitted one afternoon in late July. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the desert hills. "In Hatchita, I mean, at your ranch." "It is starting to feel like home to me too," Catherine said, "though that might have as much to do with the company as the location." She said it lightly, but there was something in her eyes when she looked at him that made Samuel's breath catch. He had been trying not to acknowledge his growing feelings for Catherine, telling himself they were just friends, just partners helping each other. But the truth was becoming harder to ignore. By August, Samuel could stand calmly next to any of the ranch's horses. He could groom them, lead them, even help with basic veterinary care when needed. The fear was still there, lurking in the back of his mind, but it no longer controlled him. "I think you are ready to try riding," Catherine said one Sunday morning. Samuel looked at Penny, saddled and waiting in the corral. The thought of actually mounting the horse made his stomach clench, but he found himself nodding. "All right, let us try." Catherine demonstrated first, showing him how to mount and seat himself properly. Then she dismounted and held Penny's reins, looking at Samuel encouragingly. "Take your time. There is no rush." Samuel approached the horse, his legs feeling like water. He put his foot in the stirrup, feeling the leather creak under his weight. This was it, the moment he had been dreading and working toward for months. He could back down, could say he was not ready. Instead, he thought of Catherine's faith in him, of all the patient hours she had spent helping him overcome his fear without ever making him feel weak or foolish. He thought of his brother, who had loved riding and would have hated knowing his death had stolen that joy from Samuel. He swung his leg over and settled into the saddle. The ground seemed impossibly far away. Penny shifted beneath him and Samuel's hands clenched on the saddle horn, but Catherine was right there, holding the reins, her voice steady and calm. "You are doing it. You are actually doing it. Just breathe, Samuel. Feel how solid she is beneath you. She has got you." They stood like that for several minutes, Samuel trying to control his breathing while Catherine kept up a steady stream of reassurance. Gradually, he became aware that Penny was not moving except to occasionally shift her weight. She was not rearing or bolting or doing any of the catastrophic things his mind had conjured. She was just standing, patient and calm. "How do you feel?" Catherine asked, scared. "But okay." "I think I am okay." "Good. Now we are going to walk just a few steps. I will lead her. You just sit and try to move with her motion." Those first steps were terrifying. Samuel gripped the saddle so hard his hands ached, every muscle in his body rigid. But as Catherine led Penny in a slow circle around the corral, something shifted. He began to feel the rhythm of the horse's movement, the way her body swayed beneath him. It was not the chaotic, dangerous thing he had feared. It was almost like dancing, a steady give and take. They circled the corral 3 times before Samuel asked Catherine to stop. When he dismounted, his legs were shaking so badly he nearly fell. Catherine caught his arm, steadying him. "You did it," she said, and her eyes were bright with tears. "Samuel, you actually did it. I could not have done it without you." He was still gripping her arm, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing, how her face was tilted up toward his. "You had the courage. I just helped you find it." For a moment they stood frozen, the air between them charged with something electric and undeniable. Then Miguel called from the barn, something about a broken latch, and the moment shattered. Catherine stepped back, color rising in her cheeks. "I should. Miguel needs help with something." "Right. Of course." That night, walking back to Hachita, Samuel could not stop thinking about that moment, about the way Catherine had looked at him, about how badly he had wanted to kiss her. It was foolish, he told himself. She was a ranch owner, a woman of education and refinement. He was a blacksmith's assistant with no property and no prospects. She deserved someone better, someone who had not needed her help to overcome a basic fear. But his heart was not listening to logic. His heart had made its own decision somewhere along the way. During all those Sundays spent working side by side, all those conversations on the porch, all those patient hours she had spent teaching him to be brave, he was in love with Catherine Morrison. The realization should have terrified him more than the horses did. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, as inevitable as sunrise. The question was what to do about it. Over the next few weeks, Samuel continued his riding lessons. He progressed from walking to trotting, from being led to controlling the horse himself. It was not graceful, and he was far from the skilled horseman that most cowboys were, but he could ride. The boy who had watched his brother die, who had organized his entire life around fear, could actually ride a horse. Catherine glowed with pride at each milestone, and Samuel found himself working as much to see that joy in her face as to overcome his fear. They had become a team in truth, partners in every sense of the word. Catherine consulted him on ranch decisions, and Samuel found his opinion valued and respected. The ranch was thriving under her management, the repairs mostly completed, a small herd of cattle purchased and settling in well. "Dalton came by again yesterday," Catherine mentioned one Sunday in mid-September. They were fixing a section of fence on the eastern boundary. Made another offer to buy the place. What did you tell him? The same thing I always tell him. No. Catherine hammered a nail with more force than necessary. He is getting more insistent, though, almost threatening. He implied that a woman alone out here might face all sorts of unfortunate accidents. Samuel's jaw tightened. That sounds like a threat. It felt like one, but what can I do? I cannot prove anything, and complaining to the sheriff would just make me look like a hysterical woman. She sighed, pushing her hair back from her face. Sometimes I wish I had someone with more authority backing me up. Not because I need protecting, but because people like Dalton only respect power. You have Miguel and Carlos. I do, and I am grateful for them. But in Dalton's eyes, they are just hired hands. He does not see them as a deterrent. She was quiet for a moment, then said, he suggested that I should marry, said a husband could help me manage the ranch, make me respectable. Something cold settled in Samuel's stomach. Are you considering it? What? No, of course not. Catherine looked at him with surprise. I did not leave Philadelphia and fight to build this place, just to hand control over to some husband who sees me as a convenient path to land ownership. If I ever marry, it will be because I choose someone who respects me as an equal partner. The tightness in Samuel's chest eased. That seems wise. The thing is, Catherine set down her hammer, turning to face him fully. I have been thinking about marriage lately, not because of Dalton's pressure, but because I have realized that I do not want to build this life alone anymore. I want someone to share it with. Samuel's heart began to pound. Catherine, let me finish, please. She took a breath. These past months working with you have been the happiest I have had in years. You make me laugh. You listen when I talk about my plans and dreams. You never try to take over or tell me what to do, but you are always there when I need help. You faced your deepest fear because I asked you to, and you never once made me feel guilty for not realizing what I was asking. You could not have known. But once I did know, you trusted me enough to be vulnerable. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How precious? Catherine stepped closer, and Samuel found himself unable to move, barely able to breathe. I am in love with you, Samuel Turner. I think I have been for months now. And I needed you to know, even if you do not feel the same way. Not feel the same way. Samuel's voice came out rough. Catherine, I have been in love with you since you stood up to Dalton in that livery stable and refused to be dismissed. I just did not think I had any right to say so. Why not? Because you are extraordinary and I am ordinary. Because you own a ranch and I work in a blacksmith shop. Because you deserve someone better than a man who was terrified of horses until a few months ago. Samuel Turner, you are the least ordinary man I have ever met. Catherine reached up to touch his face, her hand gentle on his cheek. You walked hours across the desert to help a stranger. You spent every Sunday for months helping me build my dream. You faced a fear that had controlled you for 17 years because you wanted to be braver. How is any of that ordinary? Samuel covered her hand with his own, turning his face to kiss her palm. I love you. I should probably say it better with pretty words and poetry, but that is the truth of it. I love you, Catherine Morrison. That is the prettiest thing anyone has ever said to me. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home after a long journey. Catherine melted into him, her arms coming up around his neck, and Samuel held her like she was precious and breakable, even though he knew she was neither. She was strong and brave and choosing him, impossibly, miraculously choosing him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Catherine laughed shakily. I was so nervous. I thought maybe I was reading too much into things, that maybe you just saw me as a friend. Just a friend, Samuel repeated, shaking his head. Catherine, I have been finding excuses to see you, to spend time with you for months. How could you think I just wanted friendship? Because you never said anything, never gave any indication that you felt more. I was trying to be honorable, trying not to take advantage of your kindness." He pulled her close again, resting his forehead against hers. "I was an idiot, a sweet idiot." She kissed him again, softer this time. "So what do we do now? Now I ask you properly. Catherine Morrison, would you consider courting me? With the intention of marriage, if you are willing." "I am very willing." "Yes, Samuel. Absolutely yes." They told Miguel and Carlos that evening, and the brothers grinned knowingly, as if they had been waiting for this announcement for months. Over the next few weeks, Samuel and Catherine's courtship became the talk of Hatcheta. Some people were supportive, happy for the couple. Others, particularly Dalton and his associates, were less pleased. "I heard you are courting the Morrison woman," Horace said one day at the blacksmith shop. "That true? Yes, sir. We are planning to marry in the spring." "Huh. Well, you are a braver man than me, taking on a woman with that much property and independence. She is going to expect you to help run that ranch, you know. I am counting on it." Horace shook his head but did not pursue the subject. The truth was, Samuel had already given his notice. Catherine had offered him a full partnership in the ranch, and he had accepted. They would run it together, combining her vision and knowledge with his growing skills and dedication. It was a risk, leaving the security of his job at the blacksmith shop, but it felt right in a way nothing else ever had. By October, Samuel was spending most of his time at the ranch anyway, only returning to town for his final weeks of work and to sleep at the boarding house. He and Catherine worked from dawn until dusk, preparing the property for winter, building up the cattle herd, training the horses. Samuel's riding had improved dramatically with constant practice, and while he would never be a natural horseman, he was competent and no longer afraid. One evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of orange and gold. Catherine leaned against Samuel's shoulder, and he had his arm around her waist, marveling at how natural it felt, how right. "I have been thinking about the wedding," Catherine said. "I want to have it here at the ranch. Nothing fancy, just our friends and the people we care about. Maybe in April when the desert is blooming." "That sounds perfect. Though I have to warn you, I do not have many people to invite. Horace, maybe. Mrs. Chen from the boarding house." "That is fine. It is about us, not about having a big crowd." She tilted her face up to look at him. "Are you sure about this, Samuel, about marrying me and taking on the ranch? It is a lot to ask." "You are not asking. I am choosing. There is a difference." He kissed her forehead. "This ranch, this life with you, it is everything I have been searching for without knowing it. I am more sure about this than I have ever been about anything." Winter arrived gently in southern New Mexico, bringing cooler temperatures but little rain. Samuel moved into the ranch house in December, sleeping in a separate room to maintain propriety until the wedding, but otherwise living as part of the household. He and Catherine fell into easy routines, working side by side during the day and spending their evenings reading together or planning for the future. "I want to expand the horse breeding program," Catherine said one night, her head in Samuel's lap as they sat by the fireplace. "Focus on working horses, sturdy and smart. There is always demand for good ranch horses. We would need a better breeding stallion. Thunder is good, but he is getting older. I saw one at her ranch near Deeming when I went to buy those cattle. A beautiful bay, strong lines, good temperament. The owner might be willing to sell." They talked long into the night, making plans and dreaming together. Samuel had never been so happy, had never imagined he could be so happy. The scared boy he had been seemed like a different person, someone from another life. In January, tragedy nearly struck when a winter storm rolled through unexpectedly, bringing freezing temperatures and wind that threatened the livestock. Samuel and Catherine worked alongside Miguel and Carlos for 2 days straight, bringing the cattle to shelter, securing buildings, keeping the horses safe. It was exhausting, brutal work, but they got through it together. "You are a natural rancher," Catherine told Samuel when it was over. Both of them collapsed on the porch, too tired to make it inside. "I could not have done this without you." "Partners," Samuel reminded her, squeezing her hand. "We do this together." As spring approached, preparations for the wedding began in earnest. Catherine sewed her own dress, a simple but elegant gown of cream-colored silk. Samuel purchased a new suit from the general store and spent an entire evening polishing his boots. They planned a small ceremony on the ranch, with a circuit preacher who passed through Hatchita once a month officiating. The day before the wedding, Samuel rode into town one final time to collect some supplies. He had ridden alone from the ranch, a journey that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Penny carried him steadily along the familiar trail, and Samuel found himself actually enjoying the ride, the way the mare responded to his guidance, the rhythm of her gait. In town, he encountered Dalton outside the saloon. The older man looked him up and down with undisguised contempt. "Turner, I hear you are marrying the Morrison woman tomorrow." "That is correct. You think you have won something, do you not, getting your hands on that ranch?" Samuel kept his voice level. "I think I am marrying the woman I love. The ranch is hers and it will remain hers. A man who marries for love rather than property is a fool." "Then I am happy to be a fool." Samuel moved to walk past, but Dalton grabbed his arm. "She will realize her mistake eventually, realize she married beneath her. When she does, I will be waiting." Samuel looked at Dalton's hand on his arm, then up at his face. "Let go of me." Something in his voice made Dalton release him immediately. Samuel stepped back, putting distance between them. "Catherine is the strongest, smartest, most capable person I know. She chose me, and I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of that choice. As for you, stay away from our ranch and stay away from my wife. If you threaten her again, we will have a problem." He walked away before Dalton could respond, his heart pounding but his head high. A year ago, he would have avoided this confrontation, would have found some way to deflect and escape. But Catherine had taught him courage, had shown him that facing his fears made him stronger, not weaker. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the desert air crisp and cool. Wild flowers had bloomed across the Morrison property, splashes of yellow and purple against the brown earth. Catherine looked radiant in her cream silk dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, a crown of desert flowers in her auburn curls. They stood on the porch of the ranch house, facing each other with Miguel, Carlos, Horace, Mrs. Chen, and a handful of other friends gathered around. The circuit preacher, an elderly man named Reverend Johnson, smiled benevolently as he began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join Samuel Turner and Catherine Morrison in holy matrimony." Samuel barely heard the words of the ceremony. He was too focused on Catherine, on the joy shining in her green eyes, on the way her hands trembled slightly in his. When it came time for vows, he spoke from his heart. "Catherine, you saw me when I was hiding from the world and from myself. You offered me patience when I deserved judgment, courage when I felt weak, and love when I thought I had nothing to offer. You taught me that being brave does not mean not being afraid. It means facing your fear and choosing to move forward anyway. I promise to be your partner in all things, to support your dreams, to stand beside you through whatever comes. I promise to choose you every day for the rest of my life." Catherine's eyes were bright with tears. "Samuel, you gave me something I did not even know I needed. Not help with the ranch, though you have been invaluable in that. But you gave me a partner who sees me as an equal, who respects my strength while honoring my vulnerabilities. You faced your deepest terror because I asked you to, and in doing so, you showed me what real courage looks like. I promise to be worthy of your trust, to build this life with you as a true partnership, to love you fiercely and faithfully for all my days." When Reverend Johnson pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel pulled Catherine into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, to the whoops and applause of their small gathering. She laughed against his mouth, her arms tight around his neck, and Samuel thought his heart might burst from sheer happiness. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful. Mrs. Chen had prepared a feast, and there was dancing to music from a fiddle player Miguel knew. As the sun set and stars began to appear in the vast New Mexico sky, Samuel and Catherine slipped away from the party, walking hand in hand to look out over their ranch. "Our ranch," Catherine corrected when Samuel said, "Your ranch." "Ours. Equal partners, remember." "Ours," Samuel agreed, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Strange to think that a year ago I could not even stand in a horse stall without panicking. Now I am married to a horse rancher." "You are a horse rancher," Catherine reminded him. "You have earned that title." "Only because you never laughed at me, not once, even when I must have looked ridiculous." Catherine turned in his arms to face him. "There was nothing ridiculous about facing your fear. You were brave, Samuel. You are brave." "I am brave because you believed I could be." They stood together in the gathering darkness, listening to the sounds of celebration from the house, to the peaceful quiet of the desert around them. Samuel thought about the journey that had brought him here, about the boy who had watched his brother die and spent 17 years running from that memory. That boy was still part of him, would always be part of him. But he was no longer defined by that fear, no longer limited by it. He had Catherine to thank for that. Catherine, who had looked at his weakness and seen potential instead, who had offered patience instead of judgment, who had taught him to ride without laughing once. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, a coming together that felt natural and right. Afterward, Catherine lay with her head on Samuel's chest, tracing patterns on his skin with her fingertips. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. "About how my life was supposed to go one way and instead it went another, better way. About how sometimes the thing you are most afraid of leads you exactly where you need to be. Are you talking about horses or about love? Both, maybe. If I had not been afraid of horses, I would not have walked to your ranch that first time instead of riding. We might never have become friends, never have fallen in love. So you are saying your fear was actually a blessing in disguise?" Samuel considered this. "No, the fear was not a blessing. But what came from facing it, from having you help me face it, that was a blessing. You were a blessing." Catherine lifted her head to kiss him. "We blessed each other, I think. I was so alone before you, Samuel. I was determined and I was stubborn, but I was alone. You gave me partnership. You gave me love. That is worth more than all the land in New Mexico." The seasons turned, spring giving way to summer and summer to fall. Samuel and Catherine worked their ranch together, building their herd, developing their horse breeding program, making improvements to the property. It was hard work, demanding and sometimes frustrating, but they faced it together. In October, Catherine announced that she was pregnant. Samuel was terrified and thrilled in equal measure, his mind immediately jumping to all the things that could go wrong. But Catherine took his hands and placed them on her still flat stomach and said, "We will face this together, just like we face everything else." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter. Catherine continued working on the ranch almost until the end, only slowing down in her final month when her balance became uncertain. Samuel hovered nervously until Catherine finally told him that if he did not stop treating her like she was made of glass, she would throw something at him. "I am pregnant, not dying," she said with exasperation. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. I know, I just worry. I know you do, and I love you for it, but you need to trust that I know my own body, my own limits." She softened her tone. "I will tell you if I need help. I promise." Their son was born on a warm April evening in 1884, exactly 2 years after their wedding. The birth was attended by a midwife from town and took nearly 12 hours, during which Samuel paced holes in the porch and Miguel and Carlos took turns trying to calm him down. When he was finally allowed into the bedroom, he found Catherine exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up at him with a tired smile. "Meet your son, Samuel." The baby was small and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and his eyes squeezed shut. Samuel approached slowly, overwhelmed by sudden terror that he would do something wrong, break this fragile new life. "He is perfect," he whispered, touching one tiny fist with his finger. The baby's hand opened and closed around his finger, gripping with surprising strength. "What should we name him?" Catherine asked. They had discussed names during the pregnancy but had not settled on anything. Now, looking at his son, Samuel thought about his brother, about the boy who had died so young and whose death had shaped so much of Samuel's life. "What about James?" "After my brother." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "James Turner, that is perfect." Fatherhood transformed Samuel in ways he had not expected. He was anxious at first, terrified of dropping the baby or holding him wrong. But Catherine was patient with him, just as she had been patient when teaching him to ride. She showed him how to support James's head, how to change his nappies, how to soothe him when he cried. "You are a natural," she told him one night, watching as he rocked their son to sleep. "I am terrified I am going to mess it up somehow." That is how every parent feels. But look at him, Samuel. He is healthy and happy and so loved. You are doing everything right. As James grew from an infant to a toddler, Samuel marveled at the fearlessness of childhood. His son had no fear of horses, would toddle right up to Penny and grab at her mane with chubby fists. The mare, patient as ever, would lower her head and let the little boy pet her nose. "He does not know to be afraid," Samuel said, watching his son with a mixture of pride and old pain. "Because you do not show him fear," Catherine replied. "You show him confidence and love. You are giving him a different story than the one you had." It was true, Samuel realized. By facing his own fear, by learning to ride despite the terror, he had broken a cycle. James would grow up around horses without trauma, would learn to ride as naturally as he learned to walk. The fear that had defined Samuel's life would not touch his son. The ranch prospered over the following years. The Morrison Turner spread, as it became known, developed a reputation for quality horses and well-managed cattle. Samuel and Catherine hired additional hands as the operation grew, and they became known as fair employers who treated their workers with respect. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Alice born in 1886, and another son named Robert in 1889. The house that had seemed too large for just Samuel and Catherine now rang with children's laughter and the chaos of family life. Through it all, Samuel and Catherine remained true partners. They made decisions together, supported each other through challenges, celebrated victories side by side. They argued sometimes, passionate discussions about ranch management or child rearing, but they always worked through their disagreements with respect and love. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Catherine riding out to a hill overlooking the ranch. It was the same hill where she had first shown him the property all those years ago. They sat together on a blanket, watching the sun set over their land, while Miguel watched the children back at the house. "You ever regret it?" Samuel asked. "Marrying me instead of someone with more experience, more to offer?" Catherine looked at him with surprise. Samuel Turner, how can you ask me that after 10 years? Look at what we have built together. Look at our children, our ranch, our life. How could I possibly regret any of it? I just want to make sure you are happy. I am deliriously happy. Are you? More than I ever thought possible. Samuel pulled her close, kissing her temple. You know, I have been thinking about that first day you asked me to teach you to ride. How terrified I was, how sure I was that you would discover my secret and be disgusted. And instead, I discovered your secret and fell in love with you. You fell in love with me before that. You told me so. Well, discovering your vulnerability certainly did not hurt. Catherine leaned against his shoulder. You know what I remember most about teaching you to ride? Not your fear, but your determination. The way you kept trying even when you were shaking, even when every instinct told you to run. That is what made me certain I wanted to spend my life with you. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The ranch spread below them, solid and prosperous, a testament to their hard work and partnership. In the distance, Samuel could hear the sound of horses moving in their corrals, a sound that once would have sent him into panic but now just felt like home. Thank you, Samuel said softly. For what? For not laughing, for being patient, for teaching me that I could be more than my fear. Catherine took his hand, lacing their fingers together. Thank you for trusting me with your fear, for letting me help, for building this beautiful life with me, partners always. As they rode back to the ranch house together in the gathering darkness, Samuel reflected on the strange and wonderful path his life had taken. He had come to New Mexico running from his past, hiding from his fear, expecting nothing more than to survive another day in anonymity. Instead, he had found love, family, purpose, and home. He had faced his terror with Catherine by his side, and in doing so had discovered reserves of courage he never knew he possessed. The scared boy who had watched his brother die would always be part of him, but so would the man who had learned to ride despite that fear, who had built a life and a family despite all the odds against him. And at the center of it all was Catherine, his wife, his partner, his love. The woman who had looked at a cowboy terrified of horses and seen not weakness but potential, who had taught him to ride without laughing once, treating his fear with patience and respect, who had believed in him when he could not believe in himself. Together, they had built something stronger than either could have created alone. They had faced challenges and overcome them, had grown and changed and become better versions of themselves. They had created a family, a legacy, a love that would endure. As Samuel helped Catherine down from her horse in front of their home, their children running out to greet them with shouts of excitement, he felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. This life, this love, this family, it was everything he had never dared to dream of. And it had all started with a woman who refused to laugh at a cowboy's fear, who offered patience instead of judgment, and who taught him that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it with someone you trusted by your side. Years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. The children grew, James becoming tall and serious like his father, Alice inheriting her mother's determination, and Robert showing a natural talent with horses that delighted both his parents. Samuel taught all three of them to ride, passing on the lessons Catherine had taught him about patience and respect for the animals. In 1895, when James was 11, Samuel took him to visit the site where his uncle had died all those years ago in Texas. It was a long journey, but Samuel felt it was important. They stood together by the rock that had killed Samuel's brother, and Samuel told his son the whole story for the first time. "That is why you were scared of horses?" James asked when the story was done. "Yes. For a very long time I let that fear control my whole life. But not anymore. Not anymore. Your mother taught me that fear does not have to win. Samuel put his hand on his son's shoulder. I wanted you to know this story so you would understand that everyone has fears, even fathers. What matters is what you do with them. Did you love him, your brother, very much, and I miss him still, even after all these years. I am glad you named me James then, so he is not forgotten. Samuel pulled his son into a hug, his heart full. He could never be forgotten. And neither will the lesson he taught me, even though he did not mean to. What lesson? That life is precious and uncertain, and we should not waste it hiding from the things that scare us. We should face them with courage and with people we love beside us. When they returned to New Mexico, Samuel found Catherine waiting on the porch, Alice and Robert at her side. She was older now, her auburn hair showing threads of silver, lines forming around her eyes and mouth. But to Samuel, she was as beautiful as the day he first saw her in that livery stable, standing up to Dalton with fire in her eyes. "How was your trip?" she asked, coming down to embrace him. "Good, necessary." He looked at her seriously. "Thank you for suggesting it. You were right, as usual." "I am not always right. You were right about me, about us." He kissed her softly, ignoring the groans of disgust from their children. "You were right that I could be more than my fear." The Morrison-Turner Ranch continued to thrive into the new century. Samuel and Catherine gradually turned over more of the daily operations to their children as they grew into capable adults. James married a schoolteacher from Deeming and brought her to live on the ranch, building a house on the southern section of the property. Alice shocked everyone by becoming a veterinarian, one of the first women in New Mexico Territory to do so, and she used her skills to improve the health of their herds and became sought after throughout the region. Robert took over the horse breeding program, expanding it beyond his parents' dreams. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1907, the family threw a large celebration. Friends and neighbors from across the territory attended, filling the ranch with music and laughter. Samuel and Catherine, both now in their late 40s, danced together as they had on their wedding day, moving in the easy synchrony of long partnership. 25 years, Catherine said, her head on Samuel's shoulder. Who would have thought? I would have. From the moment you agreed to help me, I knew you were the person I wanted to spend my life with. Even when you were terrified I would discover your secret, even then. Samuel spun her gently. You know, people in town still talk about us sometimes. About how strange it was, the rancher's daughter teaching a cowboy to ride. Let them talk. We know the truth. Which is that you taught me just as much as I taught you. You showed me what real partnership looks like. You never tried to take over, never diminished my role, always treated me as an equal. Do you know how rare that is? Samuel did know. He had seen how other men in the territory treated their wives as property or helpmates, but rarely as true equals. He had always been grateful that Catherine expected more from him, demanded more, and that he had been able to rise to meet her expectations. As the party continued around them, Samuel looked out at the life they had built. The ranch was prosperous and well managed. Their children were happy and successful. They had friends, community, respect. It was more than he had ever imagined having, more than he had ever believed he deserved. And at the center of it all was Catherine, still his best friend, still his partner, still the person he loved more than anyone in the world. In their later years, as their hair turned gray and their movements slowed, Samuel and Catherine spent more time on the porch, watching the sunset and remembering. They talked about the early days, about Samuel's fear and Catherine's patience, about the moment they realized they were in love. I would do it all again, Catherine said one evening, her hand in Samuel's. Every moment, every challenge, every joy, I would choose you every time. even knowing how scared I was, how much work it took, especially knowing that anyone can love someone who is perfect and fearless. But loving someone through their fear, helping them become who they were meant to be, that is a privilege. Samuel lifted her hand to his lips. You made me who I am. No, I helped you discover who you already were. There is a difference. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from blue to orange to purple. The sounds of the ranch surrounded them. Horses in the corrals, cattle lowing in the distance, the voices of their grandchildren playing near the barn. It was a symphony of life, of continuity, of love passed down through generations. Samuel thought about the journey that had brought him here, from that terrified boy in Texas to this contented man in New Mexico. The path had not been straight or easy, but it had led him home. To this place, to this woman, to this life. He had been a cowboy terrified of horses, ashamed to admit his weakness. Catherine had taught him to ride without laughing once, had given him patience and courage and love. In return, he had given her partnership and respect and devotion. Together, they had built something that would last long after they were gone. A ranch, yes, but more than that. A family. A legacy of courage and love and facing your fears with someone you trusted by your side. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Samuel squeezed Catherine's hand gently. She squeezed back, and he knew she was thinking the same thing he was, that they were fortunate beyond measure, blessed beyond words, and grateful for every moment they had shared. I love you, he said simply. I love you too, she replied. Always have, always will. And in the peace of that moment, surrounded by the life they had built together, Samuel Turner knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Not despite his fear, but because of what facing it had led him to, home. Love. Catherine, always Catherine. The years continued their gentle march forward. Samuel and Catherine grew old together on their ranch, watching their children raise families of their own, delighting in grandchildren who ran through the same corrals where Samuel had first learned to face his fear. They celebrated 50 years of marriage in 1932, surrounded by 3 generations of family, and Samuel marveled at the mathematics of love. How one moment of courage, one woman's patience, could multiply into so much joy. When Catherine passed peacefully in her sleep in 1935 at the age of 75, Samuel held her hand and whispered his thanks for a lifetime of partnership. He followed her 2 years later, dying quietly in his chair on the porch they had shared for so many evenings, looking out over the land they had built together. Their children found him there at sunset, a slight smile on his weathered face, and knew that he had gone peacefully, content in the knowledge that he had lived fully and loved deeply. That he had faced his greatest fear and found his greatest joy on the other side. The Morrison Turner Ranch continued for generations, passed down through the family along with the story of how it all began. With a cowboy who was terrified of horses and ashamed to admit it, and a woman who taught him to ride without laughing once, who gave him patience when he needed judgment, courage when he felt weak, and love when he thought he had nothing to offer. It was a story their descendants told proudly, a reminder that true strength lies not in fearlessness, but in facing your fears with someone who believes in you. That real love is built not on perfection, but on accepting each other's vulnerabilities and helping each other grow. And most of all, that sometimes the thing you are most afraid of can lead you exactly where you need to be, if only you are brave enough to face it, and fortunate enough to have the right person by your side when you do. The ranch still stands today, a monument to courage and love and partnership, to 2 people who chose each other and built a life that lasted long after they were gone. And on quiet evenings, when the desert wind whispers through the cottonwoods and the horses shift peacefully in their corrals, it almost seems like you can still hear them. Samuel and Catherine, laughing together on the porch, planning their future, grateful for every moment they shared. Partners. Always.